Welcome to another episode of Just One More Fix. This is James. With me in this episode is Kurt.
Hello.
You can find us online at justonmorefix.com or on Twitter at JustOneMoreFix. If you like us, head over to iTunes or to Google Play and give us a rating and comment. In this episode, we're going to talk about starting into the world of role-playing. And now, it's time to get our gaming fix.
I'm Steven.
I'm Chris.
I'm Stargate Pioneer.
And I'm the French-Canadian sensation.
And we're the official GonnaGeek.com podcast, a podcast member of the Gonna Geek Network.
Just like the one you're listening to now.
The opinions expressed are those of each individual host.
Check out all the other podcasts
At GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
And get ready.
Because geekiness begins in
3.
2.
1.
Let's Geek!
Welcome to another episode of Just One More Fix. So, a couple quick announcements. First, our work on the Patreon continues, so look for that coming in the near future. Probably towards the end of September, first week of October, maybe. But just so you guys know, it should be coming. And none of the format of the show is going to change. Our show will still come out and be free to all of you guys. It's one of the goals that we set at the very beginning of this, is to make sure that the show remained free.
That's right.
However, it would be nice if we could get the hosting fees and all that kind of stuff paid for. So that's the goal of this. And we are going to produce some additional bonus content and some things depending on what level you guys pledge at. So look for that coming, like I said, end of September, early October.
We need bandwidth.
This is true. In addition, you guys probably heard the pre-roll of this show with the addition of the Gonna Geek Network promo. So obviously, we mentioned it before that we were looking to join a podcast network to try and grow our listenership, and we have joined up with the Gonna Geek Network,
Which is pretty cool. They got a lot of really interesting content floating around out there.
They definitely do. So we were kind of shopping around a little bit, and I met with them at Gen Con this year and had sat down with a couple of the guys that are involved with them and had great discussions, and they are awesome. I don't know other way to put it.
Well, they're very diverse. Like, I was looking at one of the things is if you're over 25 and you've got a full-time job, there's a good podcast out there. What is it? Cody and Jonathan run something called Game Life Balance. And let's face it, who doesn't need more of that?
I need more game.
I need more game than
less life balance. Right.
I get you.
Lots of good stuff there. There's a couple other podcasts. One is I'm a big fan of now called Better Podcasting, because I know there are several of you out there that I met at Gen Con that are podcasters, and they have lots of good technical advice on how to make your podcast better
Which we want to do.
a equipment and technical level. And they are very good and know what they're talking about. It's actually what kind of brought me to the
Gonna Geek Network?
the seminar at Gen Con. I lost the word there. The seminar is what brought me there, is to get some technical advice, because I want to continue to improve our product that we're putting out there. So
Cool.
There's also my favorite podcast title now that I saw is Gallifrey Public Radio. You guys all know that we're big Doctor Who fans here, so I thought it was really cool. So check them out as well for your Doctor Who fix. So I don't know if I mentioned it before or not, but just so you guys know, our format and what we talk about and do here at Just One More Fix is not going to change. And one thing that I think is very cool, I believe we are the first tabletop gaming podcast to join the Gonna Geek Network. They have several other gaming ones
Super cool.
that involve console gaming or PC gaming, but we are, I believe, I may be wrong, correct me if I am, but I believe that we are the
I haven't
first
seen another one
tabletop.
on there.
No, I don't think so. So that's very cool of them to welcome us and to want us to be part of the network. It's very cool. So I'm looking for good things to come from that.
And hopefully everybody else out there at Gonna Geek World who's clicking on this for the first time, you'll enjoy it, because it's a little different, but I'll tell you what, I think you're going to find a lot of transferable stuff here.
I agree. Yeah. Along those lines, since this is our first episode on the network, we thought we would do, well, let's be honest, tabletop RPGs are kind of a niche market. In terms of gaming as far as gaming goes,
that's interesting, because everybody I know does it.
Well,
wait a minute. Okay, I see now. Okay,
right. So, like, in terms of gaming, console gaming and PC gaming is much larger. But thought it would be cool to introduce people that may not have. I suppose you've probably heard of it, but may not have been involved in tabletop RPGs before. So we thought we would do kind of a introducing people to RPGs kind of a thing. So if you have been with us since the beginning and you are a tabletop gamer, still stick with us, because we're going to talk about some specific things that we do when we start new games and that kind of stuff to make things progress along better and to get off on the right foot.
Yeah, and it's James and I tonight, but we are two of probably the more experienced GMs, I want to say, or at least regular GMs in the group. Other people in the group run, but I think between the two of us, we probably go back. It would be accurate to say further than anyone else. I know I probably do.
Yeah,
but
easily further. I think I started running my first game when I was 12, which would have been 1980. I was born in 79.
Yeah, so we start doing some heavy math here.
Go.
I know. All I know is that when I started, everything looked like Stranger Things. Okay, so that's actually what the world looked like, except minus all of the like strange monsters, which is probably okay. But when we were talking about today is basically bootstrapping a tabletop RP when you don't have someone who's an experienced GM around. Is that what we're looking at
Basically,
today?
because one of the limitations for starting to get into tabletop gaming is that unless you know someone who's already doing it, it's kind of a big hurdle to get over to get started. Now, once you make it over that hurdle, it's very easy. And to be honest, I think the hurdle seems bigger than what it actually is.
Yeah, because you actually already know everything you need to do. If you're into any of these geeky properties, you're 90% there. But what's 90% of a bridge?
If you've watched a movie or read a story, you're good to go.
You're good to go.
Right.
Well, I think, can I start maybe with this one? Because I think that there is a big divide between coming to this when you're 14 and coming to this when you're 25 or 30.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I work at a school and I run a tabletop gaming club. And I've also started running a game for people who are teachers, basically, who are also, who are adults. And the way you start those two games are completely different. It's the same basic process, but they are completely different. When you're 14 or 15 or 12 or 13 years old, you very much have to stumble your way into this. If you don't have anyone else around you. I think if you're an adult and you already have a fair amount of experience and life experience and knowledge about an intellectual property, regardless of what it is, you have almost everything you need. Except getting over that, as you call it, that last hurdle, that final mile to get there. And I think
that final one, it might be the hardest one to make it over because you have to get the people together. You have to take the plunge, so to speak.
Yeah.
And there's a big fear of, in terms of when you're running a game, that you're going to mess it up and you're going to do something wrong. And that fear stops a lot of people. And I think the first thing to say about that is, and this is true of anything else that we're going to say on this episode, in the podcast, and anything we do, if you're playing a tabletop role-playing game and everyone around the table is having fun, then you're doing it right. And that's something we've said from the very beginning. So when we talk about like the rules of the game and all this kind of stuff, if you modify that, if everybody's okay with it on the level and everybody's having a good time, then you're doing it right. There's no need to play things exactly as written. Do things for what works for your table, because what works for me and my table may not work for you and your table.
And so that brings us to I think we had divided up into three broad, we were talking a little bit before the episode, categories of things that you need to make this work.
Right.
And the first one, there's actually four. One, you've got to be able to get at least a couple friends together. Okay. So I'm assuming you've got that and you need to come up with a time, which may sound easier than it actually is if you're all adults. But you need to come up with a time. You need to block out, and this is going to sound silly if you've never done it before, 4 to 6 hours. Okay. It sounds like, we're going to do this if you're used to console gaming, all this sort of stuff, it takes a long time. And then you need an intellectual property.
Right.
Okay. And by that, we mean some world, some setting that everyone is excited about and that the storyteller, referee, or game master is going to be excited to tell.
Right. And in addition to that, it needs to be something that the players are invested in as well. So whether that's Harry Potter or Firefly or Star Wars or any storyline that you can imagine, down to your most obscure book that you can think of, as long as everybody is familiar with it and enjoys it, that's the more important part.
Yeah.
Then you're basically good to go.
And that's your first stage. And it may seem like it would be easy to come up with this, but then you've got to set those expectations. What are you going to do when you sit down?
Well, okay. In addition to like you're setting your intellectual property, like a lot of them are pretty big.
Yeah.
So in terms of if we pick Star Wars, just as an example, if we say we're going to play a Star Wars game, I might be thinking, oh, right on, we're going to play Imperial stormtroopers and run around and subjugate the world, right? While on the other hand, you could be the exact opposite.
I'd be like, I'm talking about the Jedi in the late Republic, and then all of a sudden we have this like nerd war, and then
So and that's, I guess I didn't even think about that. You're like, in terms of timeline within the intellectual property you need to establish the kind of characters, broadly speaking, you want to play. Not very specifics, but like, we want to play rebels that are, in the New Hope era of Star Wars or whatever that time period is.
And then there's the most touchy subject. Are you going to be a canon monger or are you going to work with a point of departure? In other words, are you going to go, this is where we're starting and everything after can change depending on the characters? Or are we going to go, the canon is the canon and you're going to play within that?
Right.
And that's actually, I don't want to say I had a discussion, but I've had discussions with people about this.
Right.
And
I think
it's kind of a thing.
In my mind, in terms of starting things, to make sure that you don't bump up against too many restrictions, because I think in terms of starting your first game, the less restrictions you put on things is probably better.
Yeah.
So if you want to stay within the canon of the world and leave the canon as the canon, that's fine. My suggestion would be to run parallel to that storyline.
Yeah.
So while
don't play Luke Skywalker.
Yeah, Luke is going to go in there and he's going to destroy the Death Star, and that's a foregone conclusion. But that doesn't mean that I can't enjoy playing my own X-Wing fighter pilot that, flies around and plays an important role in whatever, providing cover fire for Luke while he goes into the trench. Or you don't even have to be that directly involved. You could be clear on the other side of the battle and it's still
or on the other side of the galaxy.
Fun time.
But the point is just make sure and establish that. It doesn't, again, if you want to play Luke Skywalker, as we said, if you guys are having a good time, you're doing it right.
Right.
Just make sure everybody's clear about where you're going to be in the intellectual property. When we did our Harry Potter game, it was 2 weeks after the Battle of Hogwarts, and that's where we started.
Right.
Okay, and everybody understood that, and we moved forward. We seem to be having a good time. So once you've got that, what was next? That was...
I think once we've established the world and the place you're going to play in and all that kind of stuff, it comes down to choosing a rule set. Now, this may be something that you have to do sort of... before, not even sort of, you sort of have to do it before you actually sit down to play. So whoever's going to run this game needs to pick a rule set to use, and we'll talk about that specifically in some specific ways to give you some guidelines here in a minute. But you need to pick up the rule set, get a good look at it and a good feel for it. Now, it doesn't mean you need to be able to know it word for word and be able to cite that on page 31, column 2, paragraph 5.
No, you don't need that.
Don't go down that rabbit hole because that's the wrong way to go. Have a broad feeling for how things work in general and be able to be familiar with the book for if you need to reference something that you can do it. And if you can pick a book that has a good index, that's always a plus. So we're going to make a couple recommendations, though, in terms of things that we think capture very specific feels or are very flexible in what that they can do. So the first one we're going to talk about is inside the role-playing world, there is a movement called the OSR movement, or the Old School Renaissance. So everybody is broadly familiar with the Dungeons and Dragons as a term and as a game, right?
Yeah, that polyhedral high fantasy dragons, stab the bags of experience and take their treasure, as Lacey said so eloquently.
So the OSR movement, just to give you guys a quick explanation of what it is, as Dungeons and Dragons has evolved as a rule set, it has gotten bigger and some ways more refined, and it has just changed. And for some people, it has changed for the better. And for some people, they don't like the changes that have been made. Okay.
Yeah.
So for those of you that don't know, Dungeons and Dragons is on its 5th edition now. And there has been a movement just in terms of gaming in general of streamlining mechanics and making things simpler and easier to access at the beginning. And this is something that the OSR movement has done. So there are a couple of them that we'll recommend specifically. One is Lamentations of the Flame Princess, and they can be found at lotfp.com, and we'll link that in the show notes. I've got a frog in my throat, so I apologize if I sound a little funny on the mics tonight, but
it's all good.
There's another one called The Black Hack, which is another very simple but still captures the feel of Dungeons and Dragons and what it is. You're using a D20, which is a 20-sided die, and all the other awesome weird shaped dice that everybody would say is normal baggage for normal accoutrement of gaming. Right.
Such fan. And I'm going to recommend Classic Traveler, which is a D6 system still published by Far Future Enterprises by Mark Miller, and that is a science fiction one. It's not Old School Renaissance because it is quite literally old school.
Right.
It was first published in 1977.
Can you still get it?
Yeah, it's available in reprint from Far Future Enterprises.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
As well as most of these you can find on drivethrurpg.com as well.
Yeah.
So one of the things that is cool about Lamentations and the Black Hack is that if you're looking for the Dungeons and Dragons experience, it very much captures that. But instead of having 3 rule books that are 300 pages each, you have one rule book that is, I think the Black Hack might be 30 pages, and Lamentations, I think, has, roughly speaking, maybe 150. Now, inside that, there's artwork and tables, so it's not literally 100
pages of text.
Yeah, exactly. But they are very easy to understand and to get started with. The mechanics are very straightforward, and it's a low barrier to entry with those two. So if you are looking to get into something that is specifically a Dungeons and Dragons feel with that
elves and dragons and
all of that kind of stuff, those are the two that I would recommend. Now, one caution is that Lamentations of the Flame Princess is a mature game, is what we call it. So there is some artwork, and their stories are weird horror, is how they like to title them. And some of them are,
I guess they are
more, I don't know, Lovecraftian or horrific. And there's
just 18 better.
Yeah, not all of it, but there is some of it that very is clearly that way. So, and at the same time, the game itself isn't like the mechanics. Obviously, are the mechanics. So, if you want to run it for someone else, it would be whatever elements you incorporate into the game.
Yeah,
so.
It's not necessarily that way. For Classic Traveler, I mean, Traveler is in its 5th edition as well, also from Far Future. But the Classic Traveler game is a space opera D6 system that, to be perfectly frank, if you wanted to run anything from a space opera standpoint, your Star Wars, your Firefly sort of inspired games, very simple. 6 stats. It's 2d6 plus or minus a modifier, and you would learn what that is. The rule book's very thin. I think they were originally chapbook sized, that kind of 11 by 17 or 8.5 by 10 folded in half.
Right.
And I think the original set was a grand total of like 150 pages, including illustrations.
Right.
So again, very accessible, sci-fi themed, still available. So yeah, I mean, that's
one thing I would say. If you want to do something Star Wars related, Traveler doesn't really support Jedi. I wouldn't think.
No, you'd have to get into the supplements.
Right. But I think broadly speaking, if you wanted to do like a Republic era thing where you're just playing, because we've played lots of great Star Wars games where we were all rebel pilots and
there's a
soldiers.
psionic supplement for it too,
and
there's rules for energy blades,
right?
Because that was the era when Star Wars was coming out, and it's definitely inspired by, if you're a literature fan, Isaac Asimov. Okay, lots of Isaac Asimov coming through, lots of Robert Heinlein coming through. So if that's what you're looking for, like I said, Far Future Enterprise, I think .net.
I'll link it in the show notes.
Yeah.
We'll find it and we'll link it in the show notes. So those are the couple very specific ones. So one is very specifically, one group would be the Lamentations and the Black Hack are very specifically fantasy. And you could do either high or low fantasy with either of those two. And then Traveler being the very specific for sci-fi.
It's very geared towards sci-fi.
Right. Now, those are, I guess you might describe them as
genre specific. Yeah.
You're more, but also more traditional RPGs.
Yes.
And in terms of what...
They're mechanical, stat-based, skill list-based role-playing games.
Right.
Yeah.
So the other one we're going to recommend is Fate.
Yes.
And Fate is more of a narrative-based game where story is king as opposed to stats being king in a lot of ways, I suppose you might say.
Yeah, what gets measured gets done, right?
Right.
And so in the more traditional old-school Renaissance and actually old-school games, your stats are where you draw a lot of your inspiration about who you are and what you do.
Right.
In Fate, it's sentences that inspire who you are and what you... I mean, there are skill lists.
Right. So...
But it's different.
Yeah, so Fate is, like I would say, narrative focused. This is just the general way we describe it. So the easiest example that I always come up with to use is Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones, most people, if you're listening to this, you should know who Indiana Jones is. If you don't, you should pause this episode right now, go to your TV, binge watch the first 3 movies, and then come back and resume the episode.
Don't watch the 4th one.
No. Or if you do watch it to the last 15 minutes and then shut it off.
Shut off,
Which will be fine too. So, broadly speaking, though, when you make a Fate character, you're building a character who has sentences that kind of describe who they are. So if you think of Indiana Jones, the first one is a high concept. And Indiana Jones would be, he is an adventuring archaeologist, right? The second aspect is a trouble. So it's the thing about the character that always gets them into trouble or pushes them forward to do things. So in terms of Indiana Jones, I always think of the phrase, it belongs in a museum.
Yeah.
He says it over and over again. Now, he gets himself in all kinds of other trouble, but it all stems from the fact that it belongs in a museum.
In a museum, yeah. Whereas in some of the old school games, like your strength is measured on a 2 to 12. Okay, well, I've got a strength of 12. That means that I'm a strong person. And you hang those character ideas kind of come during play.
Right.
Versus at the outset where you don't have those kind of statistics.
There's also no implied background required when you make a...
There's no setting implied in the rule set.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what I'm saying, no, what I was saying is that when you make a character in Fate, there is a background implied in it. So when I describe those aspects that are Indiana Jones,
you invent them. Yeah.
Those are implying a background for that character. Whereas when I make a character in Traveler or Lamentations, there's no background implied in the stats. Whereas it is an integral part of the character in Fate.
Because Fate's a generic system. So you have to do that. Otherwise, there's no...
Well, yes, but like also in terms of the character, when you write those things out, those sentences, that gives a history to the character that doesn't exist when you just say strength 18.
Yeah, no, like one of the characters in the Fate game we have currently is can't back down from a fight.
Right.
One of the other attributes is I can't not know. Okay, and those are aspects of that character. And for folks who are much more narrative driven, Fate is an excellent system.
And I will say, it's kind of hard to describe without having something to point to and give specific examples of. So the one thing the Fate book does pretty well is it lays it out very well, and there's lots of examples in it. And I will say, I do feel like Fate is an easier game to learn if you don't have all kinds of gamer baggage where you're coming to it from a previous role player, just getting into that narrative style of gaming.
It was a big hurdle for me. I mean, for the first 25, I agree. For the first 25 years or whatever it was, and like when we played, what was it? Mouse Guard, which was the first thing abstracted like that.
Right.
I nearly had a psychological aneurysm because I couldn't wrap my mind around the concept at first.
Right.
And it took a minute.
There's all these customs that you build up as time goes by from playing certain games or just any activity of what the norm is when A happens, that then B naturally follows. And some of these games challenge those norms in good ways.
Yeah.
And it's just when you've been doing things a certain way for so long, it's kind of hard to shift
I suppose for
gears.
console gamers, it would be like changing the control system entirely.
Right.
Okay, it is now nothing like you've ever seen before. It might be good for a certain type of game, but it's just different.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's I don't know what to equate it to because except for like Kerbal Space Program, I don't really play a lot of video games.
I started playing Heroes of the Storm recently again, so it's fun. I like it.
Is it? I like rockets.
It's free too, which is the right price. So there's that.
So, and the other thing that you got to get, I want to say into your brain is that, the books might cost you $15, $20, $30 a piece or something like that. It's worth paying for them, first of all, and not pirating them for the simple fact that, they're not dealing with these mega corporations that are going to
that is something that bears
you
mentioning.
off. But also, too, if you look at the sheer number of hours and replayability, I bought a set of D&D books in 1986 that still work.
Right.
They're back compatible, man.
Right.
And they never stop running.
Right. Well, if you think in terms of if you're going to go out something to get something to eat and go watch a movie, depending on where you go and if you go to the 3D theater or not and get popcorn that's overpriced or whatever, you're looking probably between, $100 for a night of entertainment for several hours, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you spend the money to buy dice, buy a role-playing book, and sit down with friends, once you've played that game once, it's paid for itself, moreover, and then you can continue to play.
I am down into the hundredths or thousandth of a cent per hour amortization or whatever that's called when you space it out over the time I've had those books.
Your ROI, the return on investment.
It's stupid.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's just, you're not going to get a better deal, folks.
True.
Yeah.
Very true. There is some things that we mentioned that you have to get. So if you're going to play Traveler if you're going to play Traveler, you probably have D6s, 6-sided dice, conventional like Monopoly dice laying around. You're going to need several of those, but you can get those off of Amazon. Or if you have a local gaming store, you can go down there and get those. And if you're going to play Lamentations of the Flame Princess or one of those old school games or just regular Dungeons & Dragons, you'll need to get a set of polyhedrals, which those come off of Amazon as well.
But more than one set. I mean, ideally, if everybody has a set or two, and they're not that expensive, and you'll get they don't wear out. Even the D4s, when you step on them and you really hurt yourself.
You're more likely to lose them and be like,
I lost my
now
die.
They don't match.
Yeah. So on Amazon, you can get the Poundo dice for like $20.
And in terms of Fate, you'll need to get a set of what's called Fate or Fudge dice. And they're not expensive either, and they're available on Amazon or any gaming store. And then you'll need some kind of what they used to call a Fate point, and you can use poker chips. You could use anything. I wouldn't recommend it
Don't
being
use
edible.
Candy.
Yeah, because
everybody eats their Fate points. We found that out the hard way.
So I guess the biggest difference in terms of these three systems would be that you can tell any story you want with any system. Okay.
Yeah.
But when certain rule sets are more designed and more geared towards certain stories, they encourage certain things. So in terms of Fate, it's more of a narrative system. It encourages more storytelling. That gives the players more agency in the world and control over things. And while it doesn't sound like a lot, it does change things quite a bit.
Yeah, so if you're going for a lot of interpersonal interactions, if you want to do, social situations, if you want to do a lot of first-person narratives and things like that, I have found that with the Harry Potter group that I've got, that the Fate system has been enormously easy for them to roll into. The learning curve was so flat. I mean, 20 minutes later, after 3 or 4 actions, everybody's like, I got this. I know how this works.
Well, it's very simple. You have 4 dice that you roll for every roll. Every roll is the exact same in terms of what you're physically doing. And each fate die is the exact same. 2 faces are a plus, 2 faces are blank, and 2 faces are a minus. You roll the dice, and then you sort of add them together. So if you have a minus, plus, plus, that averages out to a 0, right?
Yeah.
And then you're going to add that to some modifier, and you're never going to be adding generally more than an 8. If you get more than an 8, oh my goodness.
So you can pretty much do this with 2 complete hands.
Yeah.
I mean, the entire mechanical, mathematical system doesn't normally exceed your fingers and toes.
And that is the basis for everything, which is an even lower barrier for entry because it's more about the story and the narrative that's taking place.
And if you're
being
wondering,
creative.
and if you're wondering what this is about, you know how in video games you have sometimes you hit and sometimes you don't, or sometimes you make it and sometimes you don't. The dice enter, in case you're not familiar, enter into the world the random chance.
Right.
They're the universe. They're the fate that maybe you trip walking down the stairs, or maybe you want to push that goblin off the cliff, but you fail, and instead you stroke it lovingly. As that joke goes on the t-shirt, if you've ever seen that. And so the dice are the random element in the world.
Now, the one thing that is different with Fate than the other ones we mentioned is the dice are the random element in the world in all of the systems. But in like Lamentations, when you roll a 1 and fail, that's just what happens. Whereas in Fate, if you roll terribly and are going to fail, you have a resource that's called Fate Chips that you're allowed to spend to take some narrative control of the story to say, this roll is more important than me. More important to me. I'm going to spend this Fate Chip, and I can either re-roll my dice or I can take some kind of narrative control depending on what my aspects are to be able to say things that would make sense.
Yeah, we had a very important scene in the Harry Potter game where somebody needed to zap somebody, right? And you could tell how important it was to the player because they had a pretty good stack of Fate Chips. And before she did anything, she just like pushed them all forward, like all in. Right. And that's, as a storyteller, then you're like, oh, this is going down, and you can prepare yourself for it. But they're not only a good tool for the player, but for the game master. Anyway, not to get too deep into that, but
no.
It's a great way for the player to tell you, if you're going to be the storyteller, just how important this is to them.
Right. And more importantly, it gives you the chance to sort of flatten the curve of the randomness. Sometimes terrible rolls cause interesting role-playing situations, right? For weird points in the story where something just goes terribly wrong, right?
And it turns into a fiasco style.
Right. And sometimes those are cool to have happen, and you don't necessarily want to negate those. But there are points that are critical moments in the story where it just doesn't make sense for something to go wrong in terms of the way the progression of the story would go. And that's the moment when those Fate Chips really come into play in a good way, because then it gives the player a chance to say, no, it does not make any sense in that moment for Luke Skywalker to,
just give up.
Yeah.
Which I think brings me to a point which I don't know if we had written down, but if you're listening to this, you're probably looking to be a GM, a game master, referee. One of the things that's important for you to do, which the players are not going to have to worry about, is you're the rest of the world. They're the 3 or 4 or 6 or 5 characters who are the protagonists, but you are everyone else in the universe.
Right.
Okay. So whatever system you choose, you've got to be able to live with. Right. And when you're sitting down writing your story, and you've got your bad guys and your black hats and your Death Eaters or whatever it is they're going to be going up against, you got to think to yourself, is this something I can use to help me tell the story with these players? Because you're not kind of telling it at them, you're telling it with them.
That's something that's important to note, is that this is a collaborative thing that we do together.
Yeah, it's not game master it's not player versus environment. You know what I mean? It's players with environment. I mean, there's something I guess I've been told called the AI wall. In video games where you can't go through that door.
Right.
Okay. In tabletop role-playing
games, that doesn't
games,
exist.
Yeah, man. I've got a synaptic computer in my brain. In 25 years worth of gaming experience, there's no door you can't walk through where I don't put something.
Right. And more importantly, though, there is an
Maybe
idea.
more importantly, that's incredible.
Oh, no, it is. But like also on a different kind of vein, I guess, is that if they go through a door, the players don't know what was behind that door to begin with anyway. So it could just be what you had planned to begin with. And look, Bob's your uncle. You look like the genius that placed that thing right behind the door that you know they were going to choose. When in reality, you didn't know anything, but you just put it there.
Or maybe you did. Who knows? I mean, or maybe you made something up at that moment. Because they departed, because the purpose, and that's the other thing you need to realize as a GM, the player's purpose is to wreck the story that you had written. Okay, you believe you had this great story, it was clear what they're supposed to do, all this sort of stuff, and they're going to go off the rails, which is, to me, is okay, but just realize they're going to make choices, and so that you're not expecting. And so as you're choosing your mechanic and you're writing your story in the intellectual property world, keep in mind, I don't know, whatever your goal is. And be able to roll with it, and the mechanic helps you roll with it. Literally, you get how there's a joke there because
I hate puns.
rolling dice because it's just it's wonderful.
It's a terrible pun.
Yeah, it's a terrible.
So
pun.
the big thing is to be flexible. Make sure that you don't have to. One, you don't have to win every time. That's not the goal. The goal is to make the players struggle.
And maybe kill one or two characters in the process.
I mean, maybe
that's okay too. If it happens,
right,
it just heightens the stress. But
to make sure that you're flexible enough to be able to improvise what's happening and to be able to tell and read people around the table as the story is going along to make sure that everyone is having fun. Yeah. That doesn't mean that it has to be everybody farting rainbows the entire time, but because part of that adversity and them struggling to get through situations is what creates the fun. Yeah. Without any risk, there's no real reward.
There's no reward. Yeah.
So we touched on Fate being very broad in terms of it doesn't have any implied setting with it, but it is able to tell any story you want. If you want to tell a D&D story, I would think that some of those like Lamentations would do it better, but you could very easily do it with Fate. I've actually got one going right now.
A lot of it depends on what you're looking for before you sit down and make characters for the first time, before you tell everybody this is what we're doing. Look at these 3 systems, 4 systems, whatever we were talking about. Go down, take a look at them on PDF, look at their things, see which one you think is going to work, because you're the storyteller. Okay, you're going to have to live with your decisions, and make sure that that's the one that you think is going to work best for you.
But so Fate can be used to tell anything, whether that's a spaghetti western, whether it's a space opera, whether it's a
hard sci-fi. I mean, it seems odd, but I think in the one adventure that we ran with that, we haven't had a chance to pick that up again. It did pretty well, because normally the curdle for me with hard sci-fi is like, oh my gosh, all the limitations. Well, we don't have to worry about the stats, the limitations. I just say what they are, because I know that we can't do that. And there's that transhuman element we have mixed in with it.
Right.
It works nicely for it.
So I guess all I'm trying to get at is that there's no limits with Fate. You can make it to do whatever you want. It's very flexible, and it will do nearly anything. In terms of, I know for Fate and both for Lamentations, Fate is available online as a PDF. Pay what you want, and I'll link it in the show notes, so that even if you just want to pay them $1 and take a look at it, or pay them nothing and then go back if you use it and say this is for me, you can go back and give them $5 or $10 or whatever. But it is available out there very, very cheaply, and I believe the Lamentations book is available for free with no artwork in it. It's just a stripped down, just the text. So if you wanted to get a look at that as well, to be able to check it out and see if it's going to be for you as well, those two I know have options to check out that will cost you essentially nothing. But if you do use it, I would recommend either going and buying a physical copy of the book or going back and giving them some money, because as Kurt mentioned before, all these role-playing companies, even the big ones, they're not that big. They're very, very small companies.
Far Future Enterprises is just Mark Miller, to the best of my knowledge. You know what I mean? So it's not like...
And most of these game designers, most of them don't do this full-time. They actually have a regular job for most of them, and they do this on the side because they love it, and that's what they do.
Yeah.
So show them some love for sure. So in terms of, we've talked about intellectual property and the mechanics of a game, I think we should maybe mention some story elements and how you put together a story. So if you just think of how your basic plot lines are put together for a series that you enjoy watching, whether that's Stranger Things or Game of Thrones or any series of movies.
Which is really good.
Yeah, Firefly or the Lord of the Rings movies or the Star Wars movies. and just think of how the pacing of those stories go, because that's what you're trying to emulate. That's the art form that you're trying to emulate in your story creation. So there needs to be some kind of adversaries that they're going to go up against. You want to have an introduction period with some rising action to a climax, hopefully. And after the climax, you have the resolution. And then ideally, that's where the story or the gaming session should kind of be cutting off. If you want to leave some kind of a cliffhanger to give them a little taste of something to get them to come back to the next session, that's always a good idea too. But find your own storytelling voice, because I love running horror games and telling horror stories. It's something that I like to do. At the same time, I'm probably not the best person to run
Made.
to run. Made would be a good. I don't even know how to.
I don't even know where you'd start with that. So now here's what I'm going to pick up for just a quick second. I've probably now, granted, working with teenagers different from adults, but I think if you're training a new game master, and I've done probably a dozen of them at this point, is you sit down. You get your antagonists, like James was saying. You get the big bad. You get the reveals. You get the clues. You get I don't want to call them traps, but the non-combat encounters that they're going to run into. Make sure that there is some excitement in there. Don't save all the combat for the end, because remember, you're going to be sitting down for 6 hours. Okay. About every hour, make sure there is something that's exciting. Okay. Put an adversary in there. Put an ambush in there. It's got to make sense. In terms of, it can't just be random actions for action's sake sometimes, although some people would argue with me, I'm sure. Here's the thing about Game Masters. If you get 5 Game Masters together, you'll get 9 different opinions from each one, depending on the day you talk to them. I'm just saying, myself included. And you get your maps all set. Make sure, because one of the things you're going to struggle with is internal consistency. When you watch that TV show and one day the door to the bathroom's on the left, and the other day next episode, that door to the bathroom's on the right, that can be really important in your storytelling when Bobby Jones used to be the hitman for the mafia, but now there's a character named Bobby Jones who's their friend at the bookstore. Okay. So you need to look up something called non-player characters and their function in storytelling games. Now, these days on Amazon, there's tons of books. How to run an RPG, how to write adventure modules that don't suck is one that I bought at Gen Con this year, which actually looks pretty good because I want to write adventure modules that don't suck. So you got to look at that story structure, because although you're trying to emulate those movies, although you're trying to emulate the TV series, the fact that your characters are going to be making real-time decisions that are going to mess with your plot mean that you need to keep track of who your NPCs are, non-player characters, keep track of all those things. If you're a video game player, you're the computer. You're keeping track of all that stuff going on in the background to make sure that when they get the +5 flame sword of demon slaying, that you know what that does and that it's going to be useful later.
I think it's just a matter of good note-taking on your part.
Yeah.
Doing some work at the beginning, laying out the main characters, what their goals are, not the main characters in your story, not the players,
adversaries,
and laying out their motivations and what they want to do, laying out your plot and how you want to kind of progress the players through it. Ideally, in an ideal situation, what would they do, or how would your story ideally go, and how to map that out. And then as the game progresses, trying to mold that story and guide them along that story to everyone's satisfaction, and yourself included.
Exactly. And like TV shows like Sherlock, if you've never seen the BBC Sherlock, go back and watch the first couple of episodes. They do a very good job of, imagine that Sherlock and Watson are the PCs and NPCs, patrons, bring them things to do. It seems kind of pat, but I'll tell you what, they do a very good job of it, and it works, especially for the first couple times you do this. I think that's going to bring us to the live plays, right? Isn't it, about how to see this actually happen?
Yeah,
because
tabletop gaming is sort of one of those things that's easier to learn if you're there with people that know what they're doing, or you can at least watch and
that's what this is predicated on, is you don't have anybody's house to go to.
So the easiest thing that I have found to do, and what I recommend to new players on various forums where they come for advice, is to find an actual play, is what they're called, where you can find them as a podcast. There are several of them. You can find them on Twitch, on YouTube. You can find them virtually anywhere where you can find streaming media, and just search whatever it is that you like. Let's say you're going to run we went with Star Wars, but let's say we're going to do a Harry Potter game like you mentioned, and you just searched Harry Potter actual play. You'll probably find something. If you don't, just search something in the same vein. And if you're playing something where you can't find anything for it, then just pick any any actual play and listen to it just strictly for the way the game progresses along, the way the story is told, the things that the game master does, and all that kind of stuff, to give you some kind of an example as a guide. Now, if you can, there's another option. You can go to your local gaming store if you have one, and a lot of times they have games that are being ran at the game store. There's a thing called Pathfinder Society where they have an organized play event where people come and play a role-playing game called Pathfinder. It is a pretty dense mechanically game.
Well, there's also for 5th edition the Dungeons and Dragons Adventurers League now, which is 5th edition, which is altogether a little different.
Yeah. But all in the same vein, all high fantasy.
Yep.
But at the same time, you might also find games that are being ran there that are ran with any game that you can imagine, whether that's Fate or Dogs in the Vineyard or Burning Wheel or anything.
And after you see this run for about 45 minutes to an hour, you're going to go, that's it?
Yeah.
And then you're going to go and do it, because it's one of those things like riding a bicycle. I can't describe to you how you need to balance, but the first time you do it, you're going to go, oh, yeah.
Just keep pedaling. That's
Just keep pedaling. Yeah.
Exactly.
Just keep swimming. Yeah.
So one important thing, once you've kind of got the basics of how this all works, one important thing to mention is something that we call like a session 0. So session 1 would be the first session you play, right? But a session 0 moment, you can do this as a thing where you have a specific night you get together and you have the players create their characters and set some expectations, which we'll go into here in a minute. Or you can do this actually at the first session, but I would recommend having all that done, do your session 0 where characters are created, and then taking a short break to put together your thoughts and adjust what they have created to incorporate it into your world. A session 0, what you're really doing is when you're getting the players together, you're going to have them create their characters. But before you do that, you're going to explain the world to them that you're going to run in, some things that you're thinking, some themes that you're thinking about, whether it's a horror game, because the character I might want to play in a horror game may not be the same character I want to play in a space opera game.
Yeah. And also read this go without saying, but read the rule book and make sure you're familiar before session 0.
Yeah, that should definitely happen.
Now you're going to run into some like questions and issues that you didn't think of, but at least if you have a broad, it should go without saying, but I'm going to say it.
All right. The biggest thing, I can't stress this enough, I already mentioned it once, is setting these expectations. Because if I come to the table to play in any game, and this is me as an experienced gamer and game master, my big questions I have first is, what kind of game are we playing? What kind of story do you want to tell? Because if I make we'll just go with the Western tropes of a black hat character, a bad guy, an evil cowboy character, right?
Yeah.
And you're going to run a white hat style game where we're ranchers and go on a cattle drive, my character may not exactly fit in there, right? So you want to make sure that you lay out not exactly the story, but if you had to sum it up in a couple sentences, that you want to run a game about rebel pilots that are going to fight against the evil empire, and you're all going to be fighter pilots, that's enough. That tells them what they're going to be doing and what they should have in mind of terms of character.
And every single system, every single setting.
Genres, they're really bad.
Yeah, no, I got that. But I mean, and then think of yourself like when you're on this bridge of the Enterprise, make sure you're not all pilots. Okay, not everybody can be captain. Right. Make sure that whatever you do, you've got a good selection for whatever kind of game you're playing.
Right. So if you're running on a starship, you can't have all pilots. But if you're all in starfighters, then it makes sense.
Makes sense, yeah.
So what works in one game won't work in another. So just make sure that you lay out what it is that you're setting out to do in the story you're going to tell, and then have them make their characters and be involved in that process and ask questions. Ask why they bought certain things. If they have a certain piece of equipment on their character sheet, is that important to your character? Is it an heirloom? Why is it there? Because if it's important enough for them to write it down, it's
important.
It's them telling you, this is something I want to see in the game. So once you have all those characters put together and you've asked your questions of them, and it's kind of hard to give you an example of questions to ask, but when you see them writing things down, it should give you a cue as to the questions you should be asking. Now, in Fate, it's very easy because if they're writing an aspect down, they're telling you
part of the character.
I'm an adventuring archaeologist. So the next question is, well, what school do you teach at? What digs have you been on?
College. Yeah.
Right. Or if it's in the Lamentations vein of things, if they write down, I'm a fighter. So then you ask, were you formally trained as a fighter, or are you self-taught? Was your father a fighter?
And this brings me to hey, I had this idea, this is something a player would say, can I?
Right.
And to me, the answer to that is normally yes, but. And so whatever they want to do, if it's outside of the box that you were thinking of, you can say yes, but you can also attach a stipulation to it because you don't want these overpowered Superman-style characters that can just walk in and one-punch man the entire plot.
Right.
So, yeah, you've got that one punch, but when you do it, it gives you a heart attack or something like that. I mean, whatever it is, you're going to have to come up with those plot decisions, but...
You also don't want to say, we're going to play a Star Wars game, and someone is, I want to play a ninja. Perhaps the ninja doesn't fit in this world, right?
Yeah, this is more of a Legend of the Five Rings sort of character.
So just don't be afraid to say no, but if you're going to say no, have something in the back of your mind to offer as a compromise for something the way you can make either something that's in the same vein or just another option for them, because if what they're offering to do is so way out there that it doesn't fit, then it just doesn't fit,
Yeah. And it's some of the other logistical things are some people, and I know I've talked to somebody who had talked about coming over to my place for gaming is, can small kids come?
Right.
Okay. And is your house equipped for that? Do you get tweaked off if you're running a game and someone's checking their cell phone? Some people that bothers, some people it doesn't. Are you going to get nuts if somebody has a beer at the table? Does that make you uncomfortable? Is smoking a lot? I mean, these are some very basic logistical things,
right?
But because you're going to be spending 6 hours locked in a room with people,
right?
I mean,
right. Chances are, if you're going to do this, it's probably not going to be with complete strangers.
No,
so you'll have some of these normals worked out, but if you don't be afraid to ask them, because no one wants to sit in a room with someone who's doing some faux pas that really makes somebody else mad. You just deal with it. It's not a big deal. We're all adults, so if there's a problem, just mention it and move on.
We are. And this predicates the notion that you're doing this with friends that you know. But if you're not doing it with people that you know well, just be prepared. This is actually a rather intimate sort of experience. You're going to share stories with people in what is probably a private home. For if this keeps going for dozens of hours, make sure you can tolerate these people.
One other thing to mention, if like we talked before, at convention games, a lot of times, I think almost every convention uses it now, where they have an X card in the middle of the table, where if there's some subject or something that's hit upon that makes people feel uncomfortable or unsafe or something, we're all sitting down to have a good time. And what is upsetting to me may not be upsetting to Kurt, and vice versa. So one thing that a lot of people use is, like I mentioned, is an X card where you put it in the middle of the table. And if something happens in the course of the game that makes someone feel uncomfortable, now this isn't like we're playing a horror game and it makes me feel kind of uncomfortable. It's more because in a horror game, that's what it's supposed to do. Now, this is more for if it's really something that is very upsetting to you for whatever reason, you don't want to deal with, I don't know, violence against children or something that happens in the game, then you can just touch the X card, and then that stops there, and everybody knows when I'm not comfortable with this, and then we find some way to close the scene off and move on to something else, or move away from whatever's happening.
Almost more importantly, if you're a game master, and you're going to be doing this thing, and let's say you're doing a modern combat thing, D20 World or whatever it is, and if you've got a veteran coming to the table or something like that, you may just want to touch base with this person and make sure that it's not something that they don't want to deal with,
right?
Or somebody at the table may have been a victim of childhood abuse. Even if it's a horror or any of this, you may just want to keep that stuff out of your game. But know your players is an axiom I'm sure we've picked up. We didn't come up with it. And know your players, kind of know their backgrounds, because remember, we're here to have fun. And if they're not having fun, you're not doing it right.
Now, something that we learned at Gen Con this year, which is something awesome that I saw, or actually Lacey saw it and brought it to me, is instead of using the X card, is to use a stoplight. Because as it comes from another community, that as things get kind of intense, whether we're having an argument through roleplay, because mine and Kurt's characters are, we have whatever the situation is.
Yeah.
I think we should murder the people holding the hostages, and Kurt thinks we should negotiate.
We need to negotiate more.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're going to have this role playing, and there's going to be an argument. Now, if things get heated because they do sometimes, I can just reach out and put my hand, touch the green light, and it means this is all good. I'm having a good time.
This is in character.
Yes, keep going. Yeah. It doesn't. Now, the important thing is, it doesn't mean escalate. It just means this is okay. Okay. Yeah. And then likewise, the yellow means we need to back off. We're getting into some areas where, we're getting close to where I'm starting to be uncomfortable. And then red obviously means stop. It would be the same as touching the X.
Yeah.
And I think that is the best tool to use, because with the X card, there's no way to know if you're getting close.
It's 0 to 60, yeah,
Right.
and like 0.
Whereas with this stoplight thing, it works perfectly for that. And I think it's easier to just say, hey, if I reach out and touch the yellow, everybody's like, oh, okay, we'll just back off. It doesn't have to, we can progress through the scene without, a little more easily and divert.
That brings me to the thing that one of the things that I tell the teenage players, which I don't really seem to have to do with the adults, but you may have to, is remember when you're speaking in first person, and I tell everybody this I play with who's new for the first time, you're talking character to character. Okay, not person to person.
Yeah.
And this may seem like a very elementary and stupid thing to say,
Right.
but it's like the, caution, coffee may be hot. Right. Okay. Hey, I put down a cup of coffee in front of somebody. I go, hey, it's hot. Okay.
Right.
Just as a safety precaution because it's supposed to be a fun activity.
Right.
And I'm insulting the character, not the person. And there's all these things that you will learn, but I just want to warn you ahead of time.
Well, that's the big thing is that everybody is sitting down to have fun. And that's what it comes back to for all of the advice we give is if you're having fun, you're doing it right. If you're not having fun, then you're doing it wrong.
Yes.
So don't do that.
Yeah, it's a simple test.
Right.
Wait a minute, do I like this? Yeah.
Exactly. So if you find that people aren't enjoying aspects of the game, then you need to sort of shift things around and modify. Now, that's not to say that every person has to enjoy every single aspect because different people want different things out of different stories. So keep that in mind, but everybody should overall be having a fun experience.
Now, at the end, you're going to be the game master, assuming you're listening to this. I've found it the least productive to ask what people thought right afterwards.
Yeah, because everybody always says, I had a good time.
It was a good time.
Fun.
Thanks. Yeah,
Right.
and they probably did. But you never get, in 20 years, I've never gotten any useful feedback. Okay, 20 years. So like the next day, a week later,
Right.
whenever, ask them then when you sit down again. So what did you like and what didn't you like about last time? And, and be ready to take some criticism. I mean, you're an author, but you don't have control over like 3/4 of your plot. Okay. So,
Right.
you're trying to write around all these other independent individuals who are basically messing up your story.
Right.
I mean, in a good way, but they're coming in and breaking things. And, the only way you'll get better is by taking that feedback and, using it to modify, not having an ego. Does that would that be a thing? Not having an ego as a writer?
I think so, yeah, because like I said, it is collaborative. So they're going to walk all over your story and go in different directions than you expected, and to just be prepared for that and not get upset when it happens because
roll with it.
Yeah, I mean that's part of the fun of being a game master is not seeing the choices that they are going to make,
such wonderful curveballs,
and being able to adapt to that and watching their response to that. It is a very big improv thing, I guess. It's theater for the mind, I guess you might say.
Yeah, but it to me, it gives me the feedback that a screen never did. And this is just me because the response is so visceral. You're sitting across the table from other people, watching their facial expressions, hearing them. You're seeing them in 3D. It is both like and completely unlike any other type of game you have ever played. There's tons of transferable stuff, but it's totally unlike it.
And it's can be very intense. It can be very dull at times as well. But I can tell you some of the, not to bore everybody with a ton of gaming stories, because everybody that's been playing games for a long time has them, but some of those experiences are years and years and years ago, and I still, when I think back and remember them, they were good times. I can remember the feelings and the fun that we had in those moments, and that's both as a player and as a game master as well. I guess the big advice to kind of bring this all to a close is that don't be afraid to get out there and try this. I know there's a lot of you that are probably listening to this. Hopefully
there's a lot. I don't know. Yeah.
But if you haven't sat down to play a game, an RPG before, don't be scared to take the plunge. Go out and try it.
Yeah.
There's lots of resources out there. There's all kinds of forums. There's all kinds of podcasts and actual plays to listen to, the best of which are ours because our advice is always the best. But
I think it is. I listen to what I say constantly. Yeah.
And there's
see where it's got
there's
me.
Loads and loads of resources of people to help you, and nearly everyone in the gaming community is super friendly and super willing to help. I'm always on a couple different forums. I'm on the Reddit forum all the time for RPG and for the OSR forum and the Fate RPG forum, just talking about all kinds of things and giving my opinion on stuff, and maybe plugging the podcast a little bit too. But
there's that. Yeah.
But it's a very welcoming community is all I'm trying to say. And if you haven't done it before and you're interested in getting into it, don't be so intimidated because it's not that big a deal.
And if you live within striking distance of Indianapolis, you need to go to Gen Con at least once.
Yeah.
And then games on demand, because chances are you won't get into the games that you want to because it's so high demand. But anyone can go to games on demand and play all day, every day until you fall down. And no, I'm serious, man. And it's just, you never know what you're going to get. It's wonderful. It's like Vegas, except you win every single time.
Right.
Well, most of the time. But I mean, it's better than not. Better odds. And it's definitely worth doing. If there are any gaming conventions in your area, I don't know of any others because we live so close to Gen Con. It's like the 300-pound gorilla.
Right. So we're going to go to HoosierCon this year. It's in Indianapolis.
Really?
Yeah.
We're going to HillCon, obviously, if we can.
Well,
Yeah.
everybody can't come to HillCon.
Yeah, no, that's just
We can't accommodate everybody.
Parking is going to be terrible.
But there's lots of conventions out there, and I know we didn't mention them during, like, with the actual plays, but if you can get to a convention and sit down and play some games and experience them that way, that's a great way to do it as well, too.
One convention later, you will have all the tools you need to know to do what you need to do.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think that'll do it for us today. But I was supposed to mention earlier that there are several podcasts on the Gun Geek Network, one of which is In Defense Of. Their episode 39, Space for Everyone, should be coming out soon. And they are joined by writer Ty Gooden, and they're going to discuss the diversity of science fiction across all media, which actually sounds pretty interesting to me.
It does.
I enjoy when podcasts have guests on that are like professionals in the industry and listening to their opinions on stuff.
Not just like you and I talking on microphones.
Yeah. Although I am a professional gamer. No. So check them out. And as always, I want to thank you guys for hanging out with us.
Yeah, great stuff.
Get out there and try out some new games if you guys haven't yet.
Or try out any games if you've never played one.
This is true. And as always, you guys can find us online at justonemorefix.com, or you can follow us on Twitter at justonemorefix. If you like us, giving us a rating on Google Play or iTunes or Stitcher, wherever you find us, would really help us and boost us up in the ratings. But the best way that you can support us is by telling someone that you know that would be interested in gaming that doesn't already listen to us and sharing our podcast with them. So until then, we will see you guys next week.
Hope it's all 20s.
Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at incompetech.com. You can find us at justonemorefix.com and follow us on Twitter at JustOneMoreFix.